morning, Cougars, and welcome back to Finance Friends, Episode 3. I'm Milo Kellett.
And I'm William Murphy.
And we're your hosts.
On Finance Friends, we break down real-world money topics and connect them to careers, employability, and the financial decisions you'll face after graduation.
Whether you're heading into the workforce, college, the military, or starting a business, understanding money and the economy gives you an advantage.
And today we're talking about something that affects almost every adult in America, housing.
But before we dive into that, let's look at what's happening in the economy, because housing doesn't exist in a vacuum.
And now for this week's market update. Let's take a look at the U.S. economy as we head into March 2026. Inflation has continued its downward trend, with the January Consumer Price Index rising above 2.4% year over year, the slowest pace in nearly a year. That's below economics expectations and gives the Federal Reserve more room to consider rate cuts later this year. Because inflation is cooling, markets are hoping the Fed may start reducing interest rates from their current levels, which could help make borrowing cheaper for things like cars, student loans, and homes. Mortgage rates have eased and are hovering near 6%, down from the peaks around 7% over the past 2 years. This has helped boost housing demand modestly. The stock market has been choppy, but generally positive, with gains led by tech stocks and optimism about continued corporate earnings. Meanwhile, broader economic data show that the U.S. economy is still growing, supported by consumer spending and business investment. Even though job growth has slowed slightly, so overall, inflation is cooling, which is good for consumers and markets. Interest rates may eventually come down if inflation stays under control. Mortgage rates are still high by historical standards, but lower than last year. And financial markets are sending cautious but generally positive signals. And that brings us to today's topic, housing, because inflation, interest rates, and the job market all directly affect how expensive it is to rent or buy a home. And that was this week's market update. We'll see you after this commercial break.
Looking for a shop? Why not choose electrical trades? In electrical trades, you can train to become an electrical technician for a variety of trades. You also have the opportunity to work in a co-op in your senior year. For more information, contact Mr. Bryant or Mr. Panico. Apply for electrical trades today.
Surgical technicians are essential to the medical field. They act as a second assistant when needed, and they analyze situations. Mrs. Croucher teaches the students multiple subjects, which include bones, bacteria, instrument reprocessing, multiple body systems, i.e., respiratory, digestive, urinary, reproductive systems, etc. Apply to surgical technology today. Don't miss out.
Housing isn't just about where people live. It affects job opportunities, commute times, business growth, and long-term financial stability. If workers can't afford to live near their jobs, companies struggle to hire. If rent is too high, families have less money to spend in the economy. To help us break this down, we're joined by Sean O'Neill, a housing policy expert. Sean, welcome to Finance Friends here at Del Castle High School. We're thrilled to have you with us today and really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Sean, to start, can you explain what you do as a housing policy expert and how someone gets into that type of career?
Yeah, sure. So I took a bit of an indirect path. Right now I work for Lennar, which is a home builder, a very large publicly traded home builder. I've also worked in consulting, and I even worked at the University of Delaware for 7.5 years. My start came really with my undergraduate degree in urban planning, and then I also worked in real estate development. But there are a lot of different paths you can take to get into the housing field. So there's no one direct way. Housing really impacts a lot of different areas, whether it's engineering, construction, like I said, urban planning, public policy, or even finance. Obviously, there are a lot of different paths to get there.
Mm-hmm. What's the biggest reason housing has become so expensive, especially for working families?
It's really a supply and demand issue. The problem is we're not building enough housing. We haven't built enough housing in a long period of time. And there are a lot of different reasons for that, but that's essentially the problem. We're not building enough housing in the places where people want to build. And there are very kind of complex reasons for why that's happening, but ultimately, it really just comes down to supply and demand, and especially building different types of housing for different types of needs, and building them in locations where people want to be.
Okay. And how do rising housing costs affect jobs, wages, and where people are able to work?
Well, it really affects everything. Housing kind of affects everything when you think about it. Everybody needs a place to live, and if you're not building enough of different types of housing to accommodate all different types of people, costs go up, and then you have families and individuals spending more of their expendable income on housing rather than on other things. And it impacts a lot of different things. It impacts family formation. Like one of the more interesting or kind of eye-popping stats I've heard recently is that the average age for a new home buyer, I think in 2025, was 40 years old, which historically that's always been in the 20s, and then that's grown over time as the housing crisis has kind of grown since the 2008 recession. So that ends up impacting a lot of different things. People don't have as much money to spend at restaurants, so you see restaurants struggling. People don't have as much money to spend on other goods. So I think over time you've seen, and this isn't the only reason, you see a lot of dollar store type places popping up. Well, that's because people are looking to save however they possibly can because the costs are so high, in part because of housing. And housing was actually another big factor in the inflation numbers that you'd see post-COVID. A lot of that was related to the cost of housing. And again, it gets to the production. We're not building enough where people want to live, and prices go up. As you have a lack of land, prices go up. And that has a trickle-down effect and impacts, pretty much all households in some way.
And why aren't we building enough housing right now? How do local decisions impact economic opportunity?
That's, the question everybody's trying to answer. There are very complicated explanations for that. The simple explanation is we're just not building enough where people want to live. If you think about it this way, and we were just building housing in places where there was high demand, you'd have housing construction all over the place. But we have, a series of rules and regulations that we've implemented. Most of it has been since World War II. It's sort of the post-World War II era where we built out the suburbs. We created a regulatory environment that is kind of catching up to us now, where it was easy to build out the suburbs when it was all undeveloped land. Well, there's not a whole lot of undeveloped land left now, and that makes costs go up, and that impacts housing. In addition to that, infill development, which means redeveloping properties that are already developed on at a higher density, is very difficult because of all the rules and procedures we have. You have zoning, building codes, you have to meet traffic standards, and as all that's going on, the cost of land is also going up. So that makes it very, very expensive for builders to build, which means you don't get as much development, and when you do, a lot of times it's very expensive because it costs them a lot to build. Overall, building very expensive housing is actually okay. It's a lot better than not building enough housing. But that's not very well understood by people either, because as you're producing housing, it comes onto the market. Wealthy people move up into that new housing that's expensive, but they're moving from someplace else. And so then that would have a trickle-down effect over time, if you built enough of it. The trick is to build affordable housing, so lower priced housing for people. You either need some kind of subsidy from the government or other nonprofit or private entity to basically subsidize the cost of the development to make it less expensive, or we have to dramatically change our regulatory environment to make development less expensive. And I think the second part of that is a lot easier than finding a whole bunch more money to build affordable housing in theory. But you have, there's a term called NIMBYs. It's a not in my backyard kind of phenomenon. And what you have is if you have an apartment development, and we've all kind of seen this, if you have an apartment development that's proposed near a wealthy single-family detached suburb, they're going to be angry about it, right? And they're going to come out, and a lot of times they come out, and because they're wealthy and have influence, they'll shoot it down. Like, that's sort of a great example of why we're here, because when you do that, you're restraining the market. and you're not allowing the market to meet that demand, and that makes costs go up. But for the people that already own their houses, like baby boomers, they've gained financially from this whole situation because the price of their house is going up. They're not paying anymore because they're paying at the price they bought into, not the prices of today. And so there's just a real education gap, and there's a lack of understanding about how all this works. But ultimately, you have people that are homeowners who tend to be the wealthier folks with more influence, and they're sort of keeping things the way they are. And as a result, prices are going up for everybody, including people under 40 and folks that rent. So that's kind of the best simple explanation I can give. It gets a lot more complicated than that. There's a finance side, there's a lot to the regulatory side, and then there's even a lot in terms of like construction and costs of lumber and costs of labor. But that's kind of the gist of it. And it's very complicated, kind of thing to unravel. But if we could just get NIMBYs to stop shooting down all the projects that they shoot down all the time, it would help a lot.
And for students here at Delcastle, especially those in construction, business, engineering, or digital media, what skills or career pathways should they consider if they're interested in housing development, planning, or economic policy?
I mean, you listed a lot of different areas there, and they're all good to go into. Like I said before, housing really kind of touches a lot of our life. Everybody needs a place to live. Your home is, it's more than just infrastructure and asset. It's your home. It's something that you are attached to. And it's really, really important for the development of families, for the success of individuals, for the health of individuals and families. And so, but it touches a lot of different things. So you can go into finance. You go into urban planning like I did. You could go into home building like I'm going to be doing now, working for Lennar. You can go into, like you said, engineering, construction. All of those paths, can take you toward housing. And in terms of just understanding the policy itself at the local level, I think most people, pretty much everybody, needs to learn more about their local government. It's what has the most direct impact on your life on a daily basis, and the vast majority of people know next to nothing about it. You probably don't know who your local elected officials are. You probably don't know who your state elected officials are. So it's important to know all those things, and not just to know who's elected, but what are they doing? How do they make laws? What are they working on? And how do things get passed and why? That is how the system is supposed to work. We're supposed to be well engaged at the local and state level, and we're not. And I think part of that is because we don't teach it to people anymore. So from an educational perspective, it's good to learn a lot about those things, because when you're building a new development, you're not going to the federal government most of the time unless you're getting funding. And the state government typically doesn't get involved. It's all at the local level. Local town councils, county councils, they have pretty much ultimate say over what can be built. And they're in charge of making the decisions. And so it's important that people, kind of hold them accountable. And a lot of times that's kind of how the NIMBY reaction comes in. So what you're seeing is a lot of states actually trying to override local authority to allow more development, because locals are not passing it because of NIMBYs. But that gets very tricky, because there's so much nuance at the local level that state officials don't understand, because they don't understand local government as well, a lot of them. So I would say those things. I mean, there are a lot of professional paths you can take, but in terms of, if you're just trying to learn more about it, I'd say, learn about the development process at the local level, and, how your local government, what they approve, what they look at, and a lot of it can be pretty boring, but that's really what you got to learn if you want to know about it. So.
Okay. Sean, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insight. We really appreciate your time and expertise. This has been incredibly valuable for our students.
Are you interested in photography, videography, script writing, or even just being able to visually express your creativity? Well, then you should come visit Digital Media, located in room B112. In this shop, you'll learn how to use various pieces of equipment, such as video cameras, tripods, camera gimbals, video drone, and more. You'll also learn how to edit the pictures and videos you take, create commercials, and If you're seeing a video for the school, it's likely been done by digital media, meaning that could be you. Overall, we look forward to having you.
Today, Del Castle presents Carpentry. Here in carpentry, you can build whatever you want, like houses, sheds, oversized letters, shelves, and more. Not only that, you can also meet new people and work for co-op during your senior year. Apply today.
Welcome back. Understanding housing and the economy now gives you an advantage, whether you're renting, buying, or entering the workforce.
And when that time comes, there are a few financial habits that can make a huge difference. Here's your tip of the month. When you eventually rent or buy, remember 3 key things. Know your full monthly cost, rent or mortgage, plus utilities, insurance, and maintenance. Don't max out your budget, leave room for unexpected expenses, and build an emergency fund. It protects you from surprises. Housing is necessary, but financial flexibility gives you options.
And that's really the big idea today. Today's conversation shows how housing connects directly to the economy, jobs, and opportunity.
Whether you're entering construction, business, finance, or public service, housing plays a major role in shaping economic growth.
Understanding these issues now prepares you for smarter decisions later.
That's episode 3 of Finance Friends.
Produced by the Business Technology and Digital Media career areas here at Del Castle High School. Thanks for watching, Cougars, and we'll see you next month.